Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this lecture, which is going to be, inshallah, the last lecture for this course, Introduction to Linguistics. Basically, what I'm going to talk about in this lecture is a quick revision for some topics and some elements of this course which I think are the most important parts of this course, but at the same time that doesn't mean that these parts or these topics which I'm going to talk about in this lecture are the only parts that I want you to these are only the main parts which you are only need to be considered, but all the previous classes that we have covered during this course are also important. But again, this is just a quick revision for some topics. So, what is linguistics? And that was the first class we talked about linguistics. So, linguistics, as you know, is the systematic and scientific study of language. Linguistics is concerned with understanding the structure and nature of language, which is divided into phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And we have already explained and talked about all of these aspects in detail, of course. Linguistics deals with other perspectives on language, which are represented in specialized or interdisciplinary branches, and we have also talked about these sub-branches of linguistics, such as sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, and second language acquisition. We have talked about these sub-branches of applied linguistics in variation. I mean, we have talked about, for example, about second language acquisition in more details than in further details compared to psycholinguistics. We have also talked about the origins of language, and we have talked about these 6 elements of which are to be believed as the origins of language, or the main sources regarding the origins of language. So the divine source, the natural sound source, the social interaction source, the physical adaptation source, the tool-making source, the genetic source. And we have talked about these 6 elements in detail in lecture 2. We have also talked about these 2 types of communication, okay, the communicative signals and informative signals, and the main difference between these 2 types of informative. And we mentioned that the main difference between these 2 types of, let's say, communication is one of them happens more intentionally, okay, which is communicative, unlike informative, which happens when someone may become informed about you through signals that you have not intentionally sent. So this is the main difference between these 2 different signals of communication. And then we move to talk about the properties of language, so those things which make language or human language very distinctive from other languages. And some of these features are displacement, arbitrariness, productivity, cultural transmission, and duality. And each one of these elements, you will find more details about each one of these properties, or each one of these features I think in lecture 3 or 4. Okay, and then we started talking about the differences between voiced and voiceless sounds. Okay, when the vocal cords are spread out or spread apart, when the air comes out from the lungs, okay, sounds produced in the way are considered as voiceless. On the other hand, when the vocal cords are drawn together, when the air from the lungs repeatedly pushes them apart as it passes through, and when it creates what is known as a vibration, so once the vibration happens to the sound, this is called voiced. And then we move to talk about the differences between a consonant, a vowel, and a diphthong. Okay? So a consonant is a speech sound that is articulated with complete or some level of partial closure to the vocal tract, unlike vowel, which is produced with a relatively free flow of air. Okay? And they are, obviously, all vowels are voiced. And as part, or just as one type of vowel, we have what is known as diphthongs, okay, or a diphthong. So a diphthong is a combination of two adjacent vowels. Two vowels become adjoined together. Okay, so when these two adjacent vowel sounds, okay, get together, okay, they form, sometimes they form a syllable, and these are just the most common diphthongs we have in English language. And after that, we move to talk about the differences between phones and allophones. Okay, so phone. The phone is the sound type which is produced in actual speech in the mouth, whereas allophone is a set of phones, all of which are versions of one phone. Okay, so we have phone, okay, like ta, okay, that's produced in diff, but this sound or this phoneme, okay, might be produced in different ways, okay, to be considered as a phone, okay. So it might be pronounced as you know, with a strong puff as tar, okay, or with less puff to be considered as star, okay. We have also talked about morpheme, okay, which is a minimal unit of meaning or grammatical function. And this grammatical function might include past tense, for example, or plural markers. For example, er, ing, ed, er, etc. All these, you know, minimal unit of meanings are examples of morphemes. So, as regard to this, we have two types of morphemes. We have already talked about these two morphemes in detail, the derivational morphemes and the inflectional morphemes. And we talked that, we explained that derivational morphemes can change the grammatical category of a word, like for example, okay, without necessarily changing the meaning. Unlike the inflectional morphemes, which they never change the grammatical category of a word, okay, like for example, old and older, okay, unlike the first type, which they change the grammatical category of a word. So teach becomes teacher. So the er, which came at the end of teacher, is considered as a derivational morpheme, and as a result of this, we can see a change in the category of word from being a noun, or sorry, from being a verb to noun. After that, we moved to talk about syntax, and within syntax, we talked about the differences between deep and surface structures. So surface structure refers to the differences between active and passive sentences. Deep structure, on the other hand, is an abstract level of structural organization in which all the elements determining structural interpretation are represented. And that's what we will be focusing in the next slide. Okay? So, and after that we move to talk about context. Okay? And within context we have three different types of dixes: person, spatial, and temporal. Okay, so person refers to people, spatial refers to places, temporal refers to times. We also talked about hedges and how hedges are important in either in speaking or in writing. So hedges can be defined as those words or phrases which are used to indicate that we are not really sure that what we are saying is sufficiently correct or complete. In other words, we use hedges in order to add more emphasis on something, or to show something, or to show some level of accurateness. For example, we use the words like, or such words as sort of or kind of, to show accuracy, or to show a higher level of accuracy. And then we talked about language and the brain, which is considered as a very, very important topic in applied linguistics. So aphasia is an impairment, is a dysfunction, is a problem, okay, of language function due to localized brain damage that leads to difficulty in understanding or producing linguistic forms or language in general. And I mean, as part of aphasia, it refers to people who suffer from different types of language disorders. It's also an impairment of language function due to localized brain damage that leads to difficulty in understanding or producing linguistic forms. Yes, so it's not I mean, aphasia might result in two problems. It might result in understanding language as well as in producing or uttering language. Someone who is aphasic often has interrelated language disorders. In that, difficulties in understanding can lead to difficulties in production. Okay? So one problem might lead to the next. After that, we talked about first language acquisition, and we talked about the different phases of acquiring language among children. We talked about the first stage, which is calling, and some features of calling, and then we talked about the second stage of first language acquisition, which is babbling, and then we talked about the third stage of language of first language acquisition, which is called one word stage, and then we talked about the two word stage, and at the end we talked about the last stage, which usually happens among children. That is called telegraphic stage, and some of its features. After that, we talked about second language learning, and we talked about the differences between acquisition and learning, and we mentioned the main difference between these two concepts. So acquisition refers to the gradual development of ability in a language by using it naturally rather than artificially, or rather than paying more attention as learning. So learning, as an opposite term to acquisition, applies to a more conscious process of accumulating knowledge of the features of language, such as pronunciation, grammar, which normally or which usually happens in a situational, in an institutional setting with teachers, obviously, unlike acquisition, which may or which usually happens with parents or with brothers or older brothers, actually. After that, we talked about communicative competence, and we talked about the types of competence. And in this regard, we talked about the types of communicative competence, or the components of communicative competence. So we talked about grammatical competence, socio-linguistic competence, strategic competence, and communication strategy competence. And after that, we talked about syllabic and alphabetic, the differences between the syllables and alphabets. We also talked about culture and how culture is important to language. As we have just mentioned in the last class or in the last lecture, culture refers to all ideas and assumptions about the nature of things and people that we learn when we become members of a certain social group or certain social community. Culture is also defined as socially acquired knowledge without necessarily paying attention to something, or without necessarily paying conscious awareness. That's everything that I want to say for this course. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy this revision, which I hope and I wish to be useful for each one of you. I also urge you to look at the previous lectures. Don't only depend on this revision. This is important because it will show you some important topics, okay, but at the same time, in order to get the full benefit which I want and which I hope that each one of you get, you should refer and you should revise the previous 13 lectures. Hope to see you again in the coming classes and in the coming courses, and I wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.